Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with the final video of notable names in Jewish American history for 2025. Today, we are looking at historian, author, activist Howard Zinn. Yeah, we're starting off from socialistworker.org. Um, he was a great mind when it came to history, to activism. Yeah. Um, let's see. They talk about remembering Howard Zinn. Which they discuss a lot. This is just after his passing in 2010 that they are talking about this stuff. But yeah, he dealt a lot with uh, activism, better uh, pay, better work life balances. Yeah, but they have talking about Howard Zinn from Bill Moyers. Anyway, with that said, let's actually go into a bit of this. This is from Boston University .edu. The lasting legacy of Howard Zinn. At the 2022 Boston University Department of Political Science graduation ceremony, Jim Giannopoulos, former head of the 20th Century Fox and chairman of CEO of Paramount Pictures, spoke of the formative influence of his teacher, Howard Zinn. The years I spent at Boston University studying political science were greatly influenced by the teachings of Professor Zinn and his impact on social and political awareness and activism extended far beyond the campus, Giannopoulos later said. He was an inspiring academic who instilled in us a consciousness that remains with me to this day. His legacy lives on in anyone who was touched by his writings and teachings. Zinn, a longtime professor in Boston University's Department of Political Science, who would have turned 100 this past summer, that was in 2010, he passed, was an historian, author, professor, playwright, political activist, and hero of the political left. He wrote dozens of books focused on the issues including race, class, war, and history, and is best known for his 1980 book, A People's History of the United States, which countered the premise that history must be written by and for society's winners. A television documentary released in 2009, The People Speak, translated Zinn's work to the screen and for yet another generation of progressive thinkers. Zinn was a marvelous lecturer, a seminal scholar, an empathetic teacher, a lover of sweaters and bananas, a sterling human being. Um, he would remind us that Meaningful change never comes from the top down, but always from the bottom up. Zinn also had a lasting influence on his students, both at Boston University and beyond. He was, as a CAS faculty member from 1964, he served as a CAS faculty member from 1964 to 1988, and his legacy at Boston University continues each fall through annual Zinn lecture, established in 2008, to be a stimulating and energizing memorial to the progressive political values Zinn taught. The lecture is made possible by the Zinn Lecture Fund, which is supported by a generous gift from Alex MacDonald Esquire and his late wife, Maureen A. Stafford, MD. He was one of the most authentic human beings I've ever met, said MacDonald, and that authenticity was on display on the busy, crowded classroom, and it was equally on display in his office when it was just the two of us. In the Our Favorite Teacher section on howardzinn.org, a collection of Zinn students' favorite memories, Jenny Hildebrand wrote, "His natural humility combined with his fervor for peace and human rights helped me believe that we could better people and build a better world." And John Ingersoll added, "He changed my life." Zinn consistently applied his classroom concepts to the real world. In 1971, Zinn was one of 5 faculty members to remain on strike after Boston University President John Silver shut down a strike that forced teachers back to work. Zinn and his 4 colleagues were later known as the historical Boston University Five. Howard risked being fired when he helped to break down the front door of President Silver's office building, said Boston University Professor Emeritus Walter Clemens. "I got the political science faculty to call this creative expression of political dissent." Actions like that were remembered by a student, Robert Dannon, who explained how Zinn had led an anti-war demonstration that ended up with Zinn and other students being arrested. While Zinn was given the opportunity to pay a fine and leave, he refused to abandon his students, staying the night with them, according to Dannon's feature on Our Favorite Teacher. And Virginia Shapiro, Professor Emeritus of Political Science and Dean Emeritus of Arts and Sciences at Boston University, said Zinn did not just have an influence on those on the left. She says she once asked an alum known for his conservative political views who his favorite professor was, and he immediately replied, "Howard Zinn." I paused, trying to think of an appropriate response. He laughed. "I see you are perplexed. Yes, Howard and I were about as different as we could be politically, but he urged us all to be politically engaged and active. That's what he believed in, regardless of our political views, and I was very grateful to him for encouraging me to be an active citizen." But yeah, just how much he affected so many people. But yeah. And then we got the Wikipedia page. I don't know why I couldn't find Britannica. I couldn't find anything else on Howard Zinn, but we've got his Wikipedia page. He was born August 24th, 1922, New York City, and died January 27th, 2010, in Santa Monica, California. Taught at got his education, his Bachelor of Arts from New York University, and Master's and PhD from Columbia University. He was a historian, educator, author, playwright, had one wife, Rosalind Schechter, who he married in 1944. She died 2 years before he did, 2008. They would have 2 children together. He would serve in the U.S. Army Air Forces essentially the Air Force before there was an Air Force. Reaching the rank of lieutenant. Academic work, Spelman College and Boston University. So yeah. But main interests tended to be on civil rights, war, and peace. He was born to a Jewish immigrant family in Brooklyn and New York City on August 24th, 1922. Father was Eddie Zinn, who was born in Austria-Hungary, immigrated to the U.S. with his brother Samuel before the outbreak of World War I. His mother, Jenny Zinn, originally Jenny Rabinowitz, immigrated from the eastern Siberian city of Irkutsk. His family first became acquainted as workers at the same factory. During the Great Depression, his father worked as a ditch digger and window cleaner, and for a brief time, his parents ran a neighborhood candy store, barely earning a living. For many years, Zinn's father was in the waiters union and worked as a waiter for weddings and bar mitzvahs. So yeah. Both parents were factory workers with limited education when they met and married, and there were no books or magazines in the series of apartments where they raised their children. Zinn's parents introduced him to literature by sending 10 cents plus a coupon to the New York Post for each of 20 volumes of Charles Dickens's collected works. As a young man, Zinn made the acquaintance of several young communists from his Brooklyn neighborhood. They invited him to a political rally being held in Times Square, and despite it being a peaceful rally, mounted police charged the marchers. Zinn was hit and knocked unconscious. This would have a profound effect on his political and social outlook. He studied creative writing at Jefferson High School. Was initially opposed to the entry into World War II, but was influenced by friends and by the results of the Nye Committee and by his ongoing reading. However, these feelings shifted as he learned more about fascism and its rise in Europe. The book Sawdust Caesar had a particularly large impact through its depiction of Mussolini and after graduating high school in 1940, he took the civil service exam and became an apprentice ship fitter in the New York Navy Yard at the age of 18. Let's see. Eager to fight fascism, he joined the U.S. Army Air Corps during World War II and was assigned as a bombardier in the 490th Bombardier Group, bombing targets in Berlin, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. As a bombardier, he dropped napalm bombs in April 1945 on Royan, a seaside resort in western France. The anti-war stance Zinn developed later was informed in part by his experience. Yeah. The official history stated that the Scotto Works in Pisen received 500 well-placed tons, and that because of the warning sent out ahead of time, the workers were able to escape except for 5 persons. The Americans received a rapturous welcome when they liberated the city, and Zinn would write, I recalled flying on that mission too as deputy lead bombardier, and that we did not aim specifically at the Scotto Works, which I would have noted because it was the one target in Czechoslovakia I had read about, but dropped our bombs without much precision on the city of Pilsen. 2 Czech citizens who lived in Pilsen at the time told me recently that several hundred people were killed in that raid. That is, Czechs, not 5. Zinn questioned the justifications for military operations that inflicted massive civilian casualties during the Allied bombing of cities such as Dresden, Royan, Tokyo, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II, Hanoi in Vietnam War, and Baghdad during the war in Iraq, and the civilian casualties during the bombings in Afghanistan during the war there. In his pamphlet, Hiroshima Breaking the Silence, written in 1995, he laid out the case against targeting civilians with aerial bombings. Writing 6 years later, recall that in the midst of the Gulf War, the U.S. bombed an air raid shelter, killing 400 to 500 men, women, and children who were huddled to escape bombs. The claim was that it was a military target using a communications center, but reporters going through the ruins immediately afterward said there was no sign of anything like that. I suggest that the history of bombing, and no one has bombed more than this nation, is a history of endless atrocities, all calmly explained by deceptive and deadly language like accident, military target, and collateral damage. He would attend New York University on a GI Bill, graduating with a Bachelor of Arts in 1951, and earn his Master's of Arts and PhD in History with a minor in Political Science at Columbia University. His master's thesis examined the Colorado coast strikes of 1914, and his doctoral dissertation, Fiorello LaGuardia in Congress, was a study of Fiorello LaGuardia's congressional career, and it depicted the conscience of the 20s as LaGuardia fought for public power, the right to strike, and the redistribution of wealth by taxation. His specific legislative program, Zinn wrote, was an astonishingly accurate preview of the New Deal. It was published by Cornell University Press for the American Historical Association. And it was nominated for an American Historical Association's Beveridge Prize as the best English language book on American history. So yeah, you can already see he's very against hurting the average person. He hates civilian casualties. And he writes a book, The People's History of the United States, not necessarily from about the rich and powerful and everything like that, but the life of people. In 1960 to 61, he was a postdoctoral fellow in East Asian Studies at Harvard University. Professor of history at Spelman College in Atlanta from 1956 to 63. Visiting professor at both the University of Paris and University of Bologna. And at the end of the academic year in 1963, he was fired from Spelman for insubordination. His dismissal came from Albert Manley, the first African-American president of that college, who felt Zinn was radicalizing Spelman students. In 1964, he accepted a position at Boston University. After writing 2 books and participating in the civil rights movement in the South. His classes in civil liberties were among the most popular at the university, with as many as 400 students subscribing each semester to the non-required class. A professor in political science, he taught at Boston University for 24 years and retired in 1988 at the age of 66. He had a deep sense of fairness and justice for the underdog, but he always kept his sense of humor. He was a happy warrior. River says Carl Rivers, journalism professor at Boston University. He and Zinn were among a group of faculty members who in 1979 defended the school's clerical workers the right of the school's clerical workers to strike, and were threatened with dismissal after refusing to cross a picket line. Let's see. He considered himself something of a Marxist when asked if he was one. In later life, he actually moved more towards anarchism. The People's History of the U.S. was written to provide other perspectives on American history and depicted the struggles of Native Americans against the European and U.S. conquest and expansion, slaves against slavery, unionists and other workers against capitalists, women against patriarchy, and African Americans for civil rights. The book was a finalist for the National Book Award in 1981. I'd like to see if I can get me a copy of that. Um, bu- 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 In 2008, the Zinn Education Project was launched to support educators using a people's history of the United States as a source for middle and high school history. The project was started when William Holtzman, a former student of Zinn who wanted to bring Zinn's lessons to students around the country, provided the financial backing to allow two other organizations, Rethinking Schools and Teaching for Change, to coordinate the project. The project hosts a website with hundreds of free downloadable lesson plans to complement a people's history of the United States. So, yeah. He served as an advisor to SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a big part of the civil rights protest and everything during the time of Dr. King and all that going on. So, yeah. Let's see. At mass meetings held during a visit to Hattiesburg, Zinn and other SNCC representatives, like Ella Baker, emphasized the risks that went along with their efforts, a subject probably on their minds since a well known civil rights activist, Medgar Evers, had been murdered getting out of his car in the driveway of his home in Jackson, Mississippi, only 6 months earlier. Evers had been the state field secretary for the NAACP. Let's see. He was also involved in what became known as the Freedom Summer in Mississippi during the summer of '64. Zinn recommended approaching Mississippi Governor Ross Barnett and President Lyndon B. Johnson to request protection for the young civil rights volunteers during the protest in Mississippi that would bring 1,000 college students, and thus he was concerned it could lead to violence and killings. Because let's admit it, during the civil rights era, some groups in the South had no fucking qualms with beating, murdering. Yeah. Planning for the summer went forward under the umbrella of the SNCC, the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, and the Council of Federated Organizations, COFO. Hadn't heard of them, but heard of CORE and SNCC. They were talked about a lot when it was coming to Dr. King, when I read his autobiography, when I read the autobiography of a freedom writer, they talked a lot about SNCC, CORE, NAACP. COFO's kind of a new one. We did a video on Goodman and Schwerner. Cheney was part of it, yeah. When they went down and were murdered. Though Zinn was a tenured professor, he was dismissed in June of '63 when he was still teaching at Spelman College after siding with students in the struggle against segregation. Zinn described in The Nation, though Spelman administrators prided themselves for turning out refined young ladies, his students were likely to be found on the picket line or in jail or participating in the greater effort to break down segregation in public places in Atlanta. Yeah. If there's always a tendency to push back harder against the left wing because they often push back against the powerful and the rich. If you look at history, right-wing positions are often accepted and taken on by the powerful and rich because usually they still get to keep their power and their money. So yeah, if you're pushing for rights, if you're pushing for betterment of society, that scares rich and powerful. They don't like that. And that's often why left-wing movements are squashed. Zinn's years at Spelman were recounted in his autobiography, You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train, a personal history of our times. His 7 years at Spelman College are probably the most interesting, exciting, most educational years for me. I learned more from my students than my students learned from me. While living in Georgia, he wrote he observed 30 violations of the First and 14th Amendments in Albany, Georgia, including the rights to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and equal protection under the law. In an article on civil rights movement in Albany, he described the people who participated in the freedom rides to end segregation and the reluctance of President Kennedy to enforce the law. Zinn said that the Justice Department under Kennedy and the FBI, headed by J. Edgar Hoover, did little or nothing to stop the segregationists from brutalizing civil rights workers. He was anti-war against the Vietnam War, the Iraq War. He described himself as something of an anarchist, something of a socialist, maybe a democratic socialist. He suggested looking at socialism in its full historical context as a popular, positive idea that got a bad name from its association with Soviet communism. In Madison, Wisconsin in 2009, he said, "Let's talk about socialism. I think it's very important to bring back the idea that socialism into the national discussion, so to where it was at the turn of the last century before the Soviet Union gave it a bad name. Socialism had a good name in this country. Socialism had Eugene Debs, Clarence Darrow, Mother Jones, and Emma Goldman. It had several million people reading socialist newspapers around the country. Socialism basically said, hey, let's have a kinder, gentler society. Let's share things. Let's have an economic system that produces things not because they're profitable for some corporation, but produces things that people need. People should not be retreating from the word socialism because you have to go beyond capitalism. He's right. I mean, look where we are now with capitalism. It's only getting uglier and uglier. The FBI, of course, like most of the thinkers and left-wingers, kept a file on them. Let's see. Married Rosalind Schechter, remained married until her death in 2008. Had a daughter, Mila, and a son, Jeff. Mila is the wife of mindfulness instructor John Howard Zinn. And Zinn was swimming in a hotel pool when he died of an apparent heart attack in Santa Monica at the age of 87. He was scheduled to speak at an event which was titled A Collection of Ideas, The People Speak, at the Crossroads School and the Santa Monica Museum of Art. In one of his last interviews, he stated he would like to be remembered for introducing a different way of thinking about the world, about war, about human rights, about equality, and for getting more people to realize that power which rests so far in the hands of people with wealth and guns, that the power ultimately rests in the people themselves, and that they can use it. At certain points in history, they have used it. Black people in the South used it. People in the women's movement used it. People in the anti-war movement used it. People in other countries who have overthrown tyrannies have used it. He said he wanted to be known as somebody who gave people a feeling of hope and power that they didn't have before. A list of awards, recognition. But yeah. And finally we have a list of books and papers he wrote, which is a good long list. Contributor to papers. And books. Recordings. Theater, because he is a playwright. But yeah. Howard Zinn. A look at a great thinker, historian, activist, all around good person, it seems like. But yeah. With that, we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting these links and sources in the description box below the video, as always. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.